Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. This week, bringing you a special American Probation and Parole Association edition. As the voice of the community corrections industry, APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. In addition to their U.S. members, the American Probation and Parole Association is supported by international members who are actively involved in strengthening community corrections work in their own countries. APPA's International Relations Committee aims to connect community corrections professionals around the world to inspire and share insights from their unique experiences and best practices. Welcome to this special APPA episode of The Criminologist. And now, welcome your host, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 165 of The Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, we are bringing you yet another special hybrid edition as we are once again teaming up with our good friends at the American Probation and Parole Association, in particular, their International Relations Committee. Before I share my amazing interview with this week's guest, allow me to share just a bit of brief contextual information for those listeners who may not be aware of the great work of the American Probation and Parole Association. APPA really is the voice of the community corrections industry and serves as the field's leading professional membership association. Their work is supported by thousands of passionate members throughout the United States, as well as other countries, actively involved in strengthening community corrections work. APPA has members at all levels of the government and the private sector, including community corrections professionals, service providers, libraries and educators, research students, volunteers, concerned citizens, corporations, public policy advocates, and others with an interest in criminal and juvenile justice. Everything APPA does is aimed at reducing recidivism to keep our communities safe. And that means strengthening the role of the community corrections industry. Now, as noted, the Criminologist Podcast works closely with APPA, in particular their International Relations Committee. Our goal is to expand the reach and influence beyond our shores and highlight the great work being done by some of our international partners, which is why I'm so excited to be sharing my recent conversation with fellow IRC member Joe Winkler. Joe is the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections with the Florida Department of Corrections. As Joe's about to share with you, he has been a member of the Florida DOC for almost 22 years now. And as I said, he and I are both active members on APPA's International Relations Committee. Please enjoy my conversation with Joe Winkler, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Joe. Why don't we just start off by you giving our listeners a little bit about your decision-making, why you entered the field of community corrections as a profession.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, Joe, I want to take a minute to thank you for inviting me to be part of your Criminologist podcast. I've listened to many of your episodes, and I can't help to notice how many guests you've had. Veronica Cunningham, the Executive Director of the American Probation Parole Association. I heard an episode a few weeks ago with Yana Sparrow, the Director General of the Confederation of European Probation. I've heard Brian Levins, the current President of the American Probation and Parole Association. And to be included on the same podcast, what an honor. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. As far as your question, I'm probably like a lot of people that entered into the corrections field or community corrections field. When I was in elementary school and middle school, I can assure you when the teacher went around the room and asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, I never said I wanted to be a probation officer. It wasn't until I took a course in college called the Introduction to Corrections that I really learned that I wanted to be a probation officer. In that class, we had a book that had about 500 pages in it, and right smack dab in the middle of the book, there were about 2 or 3 pages that mentioned probation. And even though there wasn't a whole lot there on probation, I knew at that point, once I read it, I was hooked and wanted to be a probation officer. Unfortunately, when I graduated from college, there was a hiring freeze with the Florida Department of Corrections, so I couldn't get hired at the time. So I did the next best thing, and I applied for a position at the local sheriff's department as a correctional officer. I got hired as a correctional officer, and I must say that that was quite the experience. And anybody that's a correctional officer, they are in a very tough field. I worked there for about 2 years. Then one day I finally got the call that I was waiting on, and that was I was hired as a correctional probation officer recruit with the Florida Department of Corrections. As I got hired, I went to the Correctional Probation Officer Academy, got out, became a correctional probation officer, and since that time, I've been promoted many times. I've held every certified position in the Florida Department of Corrections, and I've supervised every type of individuals on supervision. And about 4.5 years ago, I was promoted to my current position, which is the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections.
Joe, I have to mention to our listeners, some of them may know this, most not, but I actually started my career with the Florida Department of Corrections way back in 1988, working down in District 19-3, Okeechobee County. You mentioned the academy. That brought back all sorts of memories for me. I went through the same academy. In fact, I was one of the very first classes to go through. So when we went through the academy, the dormitory was not yet built there in Vero Beach. I think they put us all up like at a Best Western or something like that. But to your point, it was a great experience, that academy, because I came together with a lot of other new hires from around the state of Florida. So it really served as a neat little sort of community of practice, if you will. And then, of course, had all those great connections when we graduated from the academy, got into the field, and you're transferring a case to Fort Myers or Miami or Tallahassee, and you could sort of leverage all those connections. But yeah, it's like homecoming for me talking to you sometimes, Joe, from my early correctional days with the Florida Department of Correction. And as you mentioned, you are now the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections for the state of Florida. Paint a picture of some of those responsibilities for our listeners, if you would, Joe.
Yeah, Joe, as the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections, I oversee the 146 probation offices throughout the state, including the Okeechobee 19-3 office. In Florida, we supervise about 150,000 individuals on supervision. If I've got my facts right, the population for the people we supervise makes us the second biggest community corrections agency in the country. Our population is majority of them are probation cases. However, we do have a small handful that are what we call post-release cases, and you may know as parole, conditional release, or some kind of addiction recovery supervision. Our supervision strategies are consistent with other community corrections agencies throughout the country. We monitor and enforce the conditions of supervision. We also sprinkle in some innovative supervision techniques that help us effectively supervise our population that we supervise.
Yeah, I mentioned, again, I was down there in the late 80s, early 90s before I returned to Minnesota. And innovation back then, I remember we were just introduced to, the concept of cell phones, or we didn't even have computers back then. And electronic monitoring was really in its infancy, but that's where I was when those innovations were rolling out. Let's fast forward here now another 35 years since I've been working down there or so. What does innovation look like now for the Florida Department of Corrections? Because I know you're into some really cutting edge stuff down there, Joe.
We are, and to kind of paint a picture of what you just said, Joe, that we currently have 5,800 people that are on electronic monitoring. Our numbers have grown quite a bit, but as far as some innovative techniques, I guess the very first one that comes to mind is our mobile probation units. And to give you a better vision of that, it's kind of like when you go to a blood mobile and give blood. You get on the bus, it has the station setups. Our mobile probation units are pretty much the same concept. They're 25 foot long. They have 3 workstations that are a pretty comfortable location situated on the bus. We have computer setups for our officers. We have a partition in the middle. We have a seat for the probation officer. We also have a seat for the individual that's on supervision. And before they enter into the mobile probation unit, we have an awning that overhangs the bus. It's electric that we put it out. It's very big. And outside of that, we have tables that are set up kind of like you would see in a lobby setting when you go to the probation office. It's essentially a probation office that's on wheels. In that mobile probation unit, we can perform all mission critical activities just as you would do at the office. People can complete forms. We can do intakes. We can do the normal office visits. We complete drug testing. As I said, we can do pretty much any function that you would do at the probation office, and it helps our individuals out that have a difficult time reporting to the probation offices because they live in some of these remote or rural areas.
And I have to imagine the response from the clients has just got to be so positive. I mean, at its core, you're really doing a deep dive onto the responsivity principle and just delivering those interventions in a way that are more responsive to the clients. It reminds me, Joe, of a concept I've learned of when speaking to some of my European colleagues. Maybe even in the UK, they're doing this, where what they call it walking probation. They've realized that by eliminating the hurdle of requiring a client who may struggle with transportation, among other things, to report to, for example, a downtown office, find parking, all that kind of fun stuff. They just arrange to meet them remotely and again in a park or a public setting and do what they call walking probation. And it seems like you've tapped into that same thing with those mobile probation units. What are some of the responses from both the practitioners and the clients with that new way of delivering correctional services, Joe?
Well, it has been overwhelmingly positive. And you know that as far as the mobile probation unit, it hasn't been a thing, it's been a process. And what I mean by that is that several years ago, the Palm Beach County Commission, MacArthur Foundation, and the Department of Corrections met to discuss the jail overcrowding. And several ideas came about. And one idea that really impacted community corrections was the number of people that went to jail because of technical violations for failing to report to the probation. And through this concept, we've been able to reduce the number of technical violators going to jail. And you asked about the response. We rolled our first bus out in January of this year. Right after we rolled it out in the Palm Beach County area, which, as you know, was on the southeast part of the state, we were able to also bring a mobile probation unit to the American Correctional Association Winter Institute in Orlando. As we did an event there and we had the bus out front, the number of people that came and looked at the bus was incredible, and their response was incredible as well. They took a tour of it. There was many pictures being taken, a lot of questions that were being asked. And then several months later, 3 months later in April, we had the National Institute of Corrections come to town. It was 25 of my counterparts throughout the country that were in positions similar to mine. We did a presentation on the mobile probation unit, and once again, when we got through, we took them down to tour the mobile probation unit, and the response, once again, was overwhelmingly positive. My counterparts took pictures, they asked a lot of questions, and after the event ended, I've had almost all of them reach out to me wanting more information on how these mobile probation units work and what the steps they need to take to implement these same things in their particular areas as well. So the response has been great and very, very happy.
Yeah, so great to hear. So great to hear, particularly when you frame it within the backdrop of all of those technical violations that have to be filed just because somebody failed to report. I missed an early Zoom meeting this morning with some international connections, and I felt really bad about it. But I reminded myself, you're not going to jail for this oversight. And I think sometimes people outside of our field don't realize the magnitude that these decisions or mistakes people make. You know, for example, no one's ever been thrown in jail for missing a dentist appointment or for missing a parent-teacher conference appointment, but we take away people's liberty for something at times as inconsequential as failing to report. So it's a great response to that behavior. Talk about some of the other cool, innovative stuff you're doing down there in Florida.
Okay, yeah, to piggyback what you just mentioned a minute ago about the walking probation, we've got something similar that we've recently started in probation as well, called our bicycle unit. And our bicycle unit goes into some of the urban areas where we have high concentration of individuals that we supervise. And it's our concept behind that is it's a lot easier to make contact or make home visits on these individuals doing this bike instead of getting in their car, going from one location to the other. We have, so we like to have those probation officers make contact with these individuals. But once again, it isn't something we just rolled out. The people that are on the bike patrol, they had to attend a 32-hour certification course. It's a national certification, and it's worked out really good for us in the Tampa area. And it's really an opportunity for us to work with our key stakeholders. We work closely with the Tampa Police Department and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. I say it quite a bit that we're probation officers, but the reality is we are community corrections professionals. And the more that we're in the community and the more ways we're in the community really helps out with that stakeholder involvement and helps people understand exactly what our role is, and that is to be a community corrections professional.
Well said, Joe. Very well said. Can you talk about the Face It initiative down there? I know that's an acronym. Maybe walk our listeners through that.
Yeah, once again, another innovative approach to supervision. And the Face It program is a program that we started back in Florida back in December of 2021. In a minute, I'll tell you a little bit about how the program works. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about how it originated, at least for me. And it goes all the way back to 2007 when I was a probation officer in the Gainesville Probation Office. And I had a case that was transferred to me. He'd been on probation for a couple years. And during that time, his case had been referred back to the sentencing authority a couple times. And what I mean by that is he had been violated. He had got placed back on probation. And then he came to me. And as he came to me, I had him for a few months. And I thought that it was a very good case. He was complying with everything that he had to comply with. He was doing what his probation order said. And then one day, about 6 months into his supervision with me, myself and some fellow officers went out to his residence. We went out to his residence. We conducted what we call a warrantless planned search. And unfortunately for him, we found some items that he wasn't supposed to have. At that point, we arrested him. He went to the county jail. And about 2 months later, I went to the violation of probation hearing. And in that hearing, the courtroom was set up a little bit differently than a lot of our courtrooms. It had 4 different areas. One area, it had the individual that was on supervision. Sitting right next to him, it had his defense attorney. Sitting right next to that person was the state attorney. And right next to him was myself. And we went through the whole process. The judge asked me for what my testimony was, and he asked the individual on supervision what he had to say about it. When it was all through, the judge looked at the individual on supervision, and he said, "Mr. Smith, I find you in violation of probation, and I hereby sentence you to 27 years in the Florida Department of Corrections." Yes, you heard me, Joe, 27 years. As you can imagine, the courtroom gasped. The person that got sentenced to 27 years broke down and started crying. And here I was as a probation officer. I was standing there emotionless, at least on the outside, because the reality on the inside, I was broken up a little bit too. Here was a person that I was supervising that was found in noncompliance, and they got sentenced to 27 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. I must say, up until that point in my career, I thought my sole responsibility as a probation officer was to put people in jail. But that day, I quickly learned that it was far more than that, and I wanted to become a better probation officer. And ironically enough, about a week later, we had our monthly staff meeting. And during that staff meeting, our supervisor at the time said that the Department of Corrections is going to be going in a little bit different direction. And we wanted to really provide resources to the individuals that we supervise to help them complete supervision on a more frequent basis. And she said, we're going to start in the institutions. We're going to send people in the institutions to talk about probation. And as she did that, she asked for volunteers, and nobody raised their hand. So she went through her spiel again. And as she did that and she got finished, she said, "Do I have any volunteers?" And I raised my hand, and I did it reluctantly. But the reason I did is because the event that happened a week prior, that where my person was sentenced to 27 years in prison, and I told myself that I wanted to be a better probation officer. So about a month later, I went into an institution, a Union Correctional Institution, and I talked to a group of inmates about probation. I talked for about 2 hours, and I can tell you, Joe, that during that conversation, the inmates that were there, the people that were incarcerated, their attitudes changed so much based on the things that I told them about probation and the ways that they can succeed on probation once they're released from incarceration. And for me, it started something that I did for the next 3 years, where I went in the institutions on a monthly basis to talk to the individuals that were going to be released to the streets on supervision. But after about that time, I got promoted to a supervisor position in another area of the state. As I went there, we didn't have any institutions that were close by. But at that time, we started going in a different direction, the Florida Department of Corrections, and started focusing a lot of our attention on the families as well. Because as you know, being a practitioner, that a lot of times the families are around these people a lot more than we are. And then if they're around them a lot more than we are, it's only fair that we lay out some of the expectations for probation and talk about some ways that people can successfully complete supervision and become more productive members in society. So we started the family orientation class, and Joe, just like when I did it with the incarcerated individuals, the very first class I went to and instructed, the demeanor of the room was so awesome. By the end of the class, end of the 2 hours, not only did the people that were on supervision have a great attitude, the family members did as well. I did that for a couple years, and after that, I got promoted. And before you know it, I was promoted through the ranks to my current position. And as I was going through my promotions, I noticed programs like this in the Florida Department of Corrections were not implemented consistently throughout the state. So a couple years ago, I met with a group of my people within the Department of Corrections, and I told them or explained some of my vision of how I wanted to implement a program that we can call something that, or name it, where somebody will remember when they leave that class the name of the program and really take away things that are going to help them not only be successful in supervision, but to be more productive members in society. And we came up with a program called FACE IT. And in the FACE IT program, the acronym means something, but the name of the program means something as well. And I'll briefly go through the FACE IT program, at least the acronym, and kind of tie it into where we're heading with this program. What we want people to do is when they leave this program is to walk away saying if they want to be successful, they have to face it. The F in FACE IT stands for family, friends, and faith-based organization. The A in FACE IT stands for attitude. The C stands for communication. The E stands for employment and education. The I stands for improvement. And the T stands for taking responsibility. In this program, FACE IT, when we have people attend, we have their family members attend as well. We go through the conditions of supervision. We talk about ways people can comply with the terms of supervision. And as we're doing that, we implement the FACE IT program into it. If a condition can be complied with the support of family, friends, or faith-based organizations, we talk about how that correlates into successful supervision. The same thing as we start talking about the conditions of supervision, we talk about attitude and how it impacts the conditions of supervision as well. For the C, for communication, a lot of times people have a misconception of what probation really is. And a lot of times people that go to jail or go to prison, they think that probation is the root cause of that. And the reality is a lot of times it's a miscommunication between that person that's on supervision and that probation officer. So during the FACE IT program, we stress the importance of effective communication and talk about that within the conditions of supervision. But for employment and education, we talk about that quite a bit whenever we talk about the FACE IT program. There is a standard condition in Florida where somebody has to maintain gainful employment. And as we do that, in the FACE IT program, we talk about ways people can seek gainful employment in the community and some of the resources we have available. For the I in FACE IT, we talk about ways to improve. We ask them to set goals. We relate that to the conditions of supervision and ask them to set short-term goals, midterm goals, and long-term goals. The short-term goal may be to get off probation successfully. The long-term may be to work with probation to find a position of employment that is not just a job, but it's a career. And the T in FACE IT stands for taking responsibility. And in the program, we don't so much talk about taking responsibility for the crime they're on probation for. We really talk about taking responsibility for all the other letters in FACE IT. Because we know if somebody seeks help from family, friends, and faith-based organizations, if they have the right attitude, they know how to communicate, if they're gainfully employed, or they're always looking to make improvements, their chances for success, not just on supervision, but to be more productive members in the community, goes up greatly. But there's more to the FACE IT program than just the acronym. it's also within the name of Face It. As a community corrections practitioner, I think about my career and I think about the people that have been on supervision before and think about the people that have successfully completed supervision, and I see their faces. And the reality is, in the Florida Department of Corrections, when we think of success, we want to see the faces of anybody that's being released from incarceration, anybody that's completing supervision. Hence the name and program called Face It.
I love it, Joe. And the inner researcher and implementation scientist in me would love to just really do a deep dive on all of these things with you. We could, in fact, likely do a whole other podcast episode just on the Face It program. But just taking one aspect of the program, the family, friends, and faith-based organizations, we know through even the risk needs responsivity framework, the value and importance of social support. So I don't need to go past that one, that and the attitudes and everything else you've got there. But yeah, you've really got the makings of an outstanding program here. I'm looking forward to getting more details on that and even promoting it on future programs. I just really love the approach you're taking with that.
Yeah, once again, what a great concept for practitioners. Oftentimes when people think about people being reentered back into society, they don't think about the hardships that are associated with that. Released from incarceration, they've been incarcerated for 4, 5, 6 years, and they're walking back out on the streets, and they want to become productive members of the community. It is not that easy, and we didn't come up with the reentry simulations, but we did go through a program a couple years ago in the Florida Department of Corrections. We were able to see a reentry simulation in place, and through these simulations, it has stations set up, 8 to 10 stations set up that play out what somebody goes through as they're released from incarceration. There are different stages. There's different time frames set. Each of the members that participate, generally practitioners, they are given a folder to tell them what their status is in the community, what they have in store for them, and what they have as resources readily available to them. As we went through the program and got to see really how beneficial it was, we decided to do the same program at the Florida Association of Community Corrections Annual Institute. That's a program that we do. It's equivalent to APPA, or the American Probation and Parole Association, but it's not at the statewide level in Florida. We do it once a year, and we did this reentry simulation. We had about 120 people attend the simulation by itself. And we did have the executive director of the American Probation and Parole Association, Veronica Cunningham, in attendance, as well as some people from Reform Alliance and some people from the Tennessee Department of Correction. When we did it, it was so beneficial. People really got to see what kind of hardships played out when somebody's being released from incarceration. At that point, I made a decision that every staff member in the Florida Department of Corrections or within community corrections would go through a reentry simulation to show them just what it's like. That way it can help them become a better community corrections professional. And we've expanded it a little bit more, even though it wasn't a concept by us. We've also implemented some changes into it that shows the hardship that a sexual offender will go through. We've also invited stakeholders from the community, sheriff's departments, police chiefs, people that work in local police departments, state attorneys, public defenders, and other stakeholders like legislators that really need to know what some of those hardships are. Anybody that goes through these reentry simulations will find out that it isn't that easy reintegrating back into society, and it really helps us out with some of the hardships that they may encounter.
Joe, I was presenting at was actually a federal probation conference, but it was in Palm Beach, Florida. And when I was done with my little dog and pony show on desistance from crime, another speaker was there, and they were putting on one of these reentry simulations. I wonder if we weren't both perhaps exposed to the same one. But it's amazing, as you said, as far as the perspective taking that goes on from the practitioners who really don't realize the magnitude of the hurdles that folks go through when they're being asked to reenter society from from a state of incarceration. So I'm going to get more information on that as well. That was awesome. Joe, as you know, one of the goals of my podcast is to showcase these great initiatives. Do you have any plans to showcase these initiatives if listeners, perhaps even in Florida or the Southeast, are wondering to get a more hands-on look at these? What plans do you have to showcase your great work?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Joe. I really, really appreciate that. And we've had the luxury of showcasing the Face It program at the American Probation and Parole Institute back in January of 2022, as well as the Fifth World Congress in Ottawa, Canada in October of last year. But the good news is that the American Probation and Parole Association that's going to take place in New York in August, we have 3 of these presentations wrapped into one: the mobile probation unit, the bike unit, and the Face It program, where myself, Regional Director Justine Patterson, who's responsible for the southern area of the state, and Regional Director Mike Anderson, who's responsible for the central part of the state, we will join forces and do a presentation at the American Probation and Parole Institute with those first 3 that I mentioned. But it gets even a little bit better than that. I received a phone call from Miss Veronica Cunningham, the Executive Director of APPA, about 3 weeks ago, and we were talking a lot about the mobile probation unit. And she says, Joe, it really would be nice to have one of those mobile probation units displayed at the Institute at the American Probation and Parole Association in August. And I agreed with her, and we talked through it a little bit. I got off the phone, and the next working day, I kind of talked to some people within our leadership positions here, and we made the decision that we are going to take a mobile probation unit to the American Probation and Parole Association Institute, along with a couple of our bikes, and we're going to do this presentation. And as Veronica agreed to and said to me, that we're going to be able to bring this mobile probation unit into the hotel. They're going to rise it up to one of the floors that we have the conference breakaway sessions at. And this mobile probation unit, along with the bikes, will be on full display for anybody that attends the annual institute. And with that, Joe, I do want to give kudos to Veronica for having that vision, for having that foresight. It's a good chance to showcase what we're doing in Florida, but it's even a better chance to showcase where community corrections is heading. If I had a crystal ball and I was able to look into it for going out 5 years from now, I'm very confident these mobile probation units aren't just going to be in Florida. They're going to be throughout the country, because it's a really innovative way of giving another resource to the individuals that we supervise.
Yeah, and I don't know about you down there in Florida, Joe, but I know here, because of the pandemic, a lot of agencies, after sending all of their staff members home, are now struggling with the challenges of lessening their footprint, if you will. So sort of condensing office spaces and almost reimagining, as I said, the value added of having those traditional probation offices. So these mobile probation units could really be a wave of the future. And kudos to you. And yes, thank you to Veronica for her vision and having this showcased at the APPA Training Institute in New York City this coming August of 2023. I will be there as well. So if you're listening, you can track down the 2 Joes, check out the mobile probation units, the bike units, and everything else that Joe is going to be showcasing for us at that APPA Institute in New York City. Joe, you and I have met before. I think we met at APPA in Atlanta, I want to say, and we've had some great conversations offline. I've heard you say in the past that you feel probation officers are the most important members of the criminal justice system. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, what I mean by that, Joe, is that as community corrections professionals, we play a diverse role in the corrections field. If I were to ask community corrections professionals what the role of a probation officer is, the answers would vary, but they would all go back to one thing, and that is to protect the public. That's a pretty easy answer, and that's a good answer, because if we look at the mission statements of community corrections agencies across the country, there's a lot of them have protect the public in that mission statement. Where the answer gets a little bit more difficult is how do we protect the public? And that's why I say we're the most important members of the criminal justice system, because I know in Florida, and we're not unique, everybody that is a community corrections professional has different areas, ways they protect the public. And in Florida, we do it by one way, by monitoring and enforcing the conditions of supervision. We also do it by reporting all willful noncompliance to the Sentencing and Releasing Authority. We also do it by providing positive reinforcement to the individuals we supervise. Another way we do it is by providing tools and resources to help individuals become more productive members in society. As you look at those roles, you see the diverseness that's from one end of the spectrum to the other, and all the things that we do in between. There's no other criminal justice agency that has such diverse role as we do, and that's why I say we're the most important members in the criminal justice system.
I agree with you so much, Joe, and I've been having this conversation a lot with myself and with colleagues and posing it to listeners, but we've been talking about all these great innovations in corrections, which are so worthwhile. And I really think that the field is almost going through an identity crisis, if you will. I know we're all familiar with that term that we wear two hats, right? We do have a role, as you said, with enforcement and more alignment with law enforcement. But then the more we learn about evidence-based practices and core correctional skills, we're also adapting that change agent, more of that social worker role. So when I say we're going through an identity crisis, I think we're realizing the challenge that we place on the probation officers with balancing those two legitimate functions of a probation officer. Maybe let's unpack what that looks like for the Florida DOC. So say, for example, what are some ways you monitor and enforce conditions of supervision?
Yeah, Joe, in Florida, anybody that's sentenced to supervision are bound to the same 14 standard conditions of supervision. Any special condition that's posed by the sentencing and releasing authority. The way we monitor and enforce those, naturally, one of the ways is when individuals come into the probation office and we meet with them. Then at that point, we go over the conditions with them. Each month when they come in, we go over the special conditions with them, try to provide them the best guidance we can to ensure that they're complying with those terms and conditions of supervision. Also, when they come into the office, we do any kind of mission critical activity that we can, like performing a drug test or doing anything that really can assist them in their terms of probation. We also do field visits. Sometimes when we do our field visits, we just do a routine home check. We talk to the individual inside their residence. Sometimes we'll do a walkthrough of that residence to see if there's any items that they are in plain view that they shouldn't have. And sometimes we even do warrantless planned searches. And, that's a big thing that we do here to help ensure compliance. And I'll share with you a little bit about some of the searches that we've done in the past that have really helped us enforce the conditions of supervision. And I'll go back to the first one, back to March of 2019. We had probation officers from our Inverness probation office do a search of an individual's residence. When it was all said and done, they found multiple firearms. They found 1 pound of methamphetamine, 3 grams of heroin, a milliliter of fentanyl, 12 grams of cocaine, and 4 pounds of marijuana. When it was all said and done, the sheriff of Citrus County issued a press release and said that it was the biggest methamphetamine bust they've ever had in Citrus County history. And if it wasn't for our probation staff monitoring and enforcing the conditions of supervision, this would have never happened. Then I'll fast forward 3 months later in that same area. Some of those same officers went out and did another search of a residence, and they found 167 grams of methamphetamine, 100 grams of cocaine, 1,000 prescription narcotic pills, 60 ecstasy pills, 34 pounds of marijuana, over $970,000 worth of street drugs. And this time when Sheriff Pendergrass released that press release, he didn't say it was the biggest methamphetamine bust in Citrus County history. He said it was the biggest drug bust in Citrus County history. And if it wasn't for our probation officers, it would have never happened. And then here, December of last year, all the way down in Fort Myers, which is on the north or southwest part of our state, once again, we had officers that did a search for residents. This time they found over $11,000 in cash. They found an AR-15 pistol, an AR-15 automatic rifle, 7 kilograms of fentanyl, 2 kilograms of cocaine, 134 grams of Xanax, 565 grams of oxycodone. The list goes on with marijuana, methamphetamine, and this time there were several media outlets that said that there was enough fentanyl to kill over 500,000 people. So as we talk about protecting the public, The first way we do it is through the monitoring and enforcing conditions of supervision. As you can see, it isn't just about protecting the individuals on supervision. If there's enough fentanyl to kill 500,000 people, that's protecting our community.
Yeah, it is. And Joe, you touched on this earlier when you were talking about the mobile probation units and how they are in many ways an answer to the issue of folks not being able to simply report and getting in trouble with those technical noncompliance issues. What is Florida's overall approach then to reporting technical noncompliance?
Technical noncompliance, yes. If I can take you back, Joe, to a time, February 1st of 2004, when there was a young girl, 11-year-old girl, that was walking home from her friend's house to her parents' house, and it was on Super Bowl Sunday. And as she was walking home, she walked in front of a car wash that had video cameras, and as she walked in front of these cameras, a gentleman walked up to her, and it was later determined that he abducted her. And as he abducted her, he took her back to his place, he killed her, he raped her. And from those video cameras, a nationwide manhunt ensued, and they later found this gentleman who was named Joseph Smith. Unfortunately for us in the Florida Department of Corrections, he was on felony probation, and it really gave us kind of a black eye because I said it made national media attention. And then about 6 months later, in August of that same year, we had another person that was on probation, and his name is Troy Victorino. He moved out of a residence and he left his belongings there. And later on, he went back to the residence along with 3 of his friends, and he went to collect the things that were in the residence. And when he got there, there were 6 people there, and they were compliant. They wanted to give the stuff back to him, but an altercation ensued. And before it was all said and done, Mr. Victorino and his 3 accomplices brutally killed the 6 people in the residence along with the family pet. It's often referred to as the Deltona Massacre, or what you may have heard before is the Xbox Murders. Both these events made national media attention, and from both of these events, the following legislative session, there was legislation passed that impacted the Florida Department of Corrections. The biggest thing is it started to identify violent felony offenders of special concern, but internally it did something else. We implemented something called zero tolerance. And during zero tolerance, we were required to report all compliance to the Sentencing and Releasing Authority immediately. And I was a probation officer back during this time. We would have people that would come into the office that were on probation. If they were behind on their money, we would notify the courts, and a lot of times we would lock this person up right away. As you can imagine, it eroded the confidence in our stakeholders. The sheriff's departments got a little upset with us. The courts got upset with us. And as we did this zero tolerance, we slowly transitioned out of it. And then in 2012, we started implementing other ways of reporting technical noncompliance, one of them being through a technical violation notification letter that we actually started in 2008. Then in 2012, we implemented a program called the Alternative Sanctioning Program. And that program is modeled after the HOPE model out of Hawaii, where we have swift actions. If somebody has a willful technical violation, then at that point, instead of arresting somebody or referring them back through a violation report, affidavit, and warrant, we can put them in this alternative sanctioning program, let them essentially right the wrong while they're walking the streets. The program worked so good that the Florida legislature heard about it, and in 2019, they codified this program in the Florida statute through the passage of House Bill 7125. I'm happy to say, Joe, that in recent years, as we continue to look at our technical violations going to prison, that because of this program, we've reduced the number of technical violators going to prison by over 2,000. You may say, well, how does this impact public safety? Well, the way it impacts public safety is if you have somebody that's walking the streets, they smoke marijuana, you put them in jail for 45, 60, 90 days, and they get back out on the streets, they've got a family that's dependent on them, well, they're going to start back over. That clock resets. But if you can apply a sanction, they comply with that sanction, leave them in the communities as productive members, they don't have to go to jail and start back over when they get out. So one of the ways we protect the public is by implementing programs like this that help individuals out to right or wrong and not always putting them in the county jail or incarcerating them in a prison.
I love that approach you take, Joe, that more sort of harm reduction approach than the aforementioned zero tolerance. And whether it's three strikes rules or zero tolerance, there just seems to be so many more unintended consequences with those initiatives when they're first rolled out. So glad to hear that you have problem solved around some of those compliance mandates from Florida. That sounds amazing what you're doing down there. I know in the research world, when I train folks, we always talk about the 4-to-1 ratio of positive to negative reinforcements, which we like our POs to do. So maybe talk about some of the incentive programs used in Florida, sort of that balancing out the carrot and stick, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good question too, Joe. And I've heard Brian Lovins, when he spoke about this as well, I think he did on your podcast too, talked about that ratio. And it's very important. Everybody likes positive reinforcement, and having that 4-to-1 ratio is perfect. And we see that in the Florida Department of Corrections as well. And we have two really good programs that really highlight the incentive programs that we have. The first one is what we call our telephone reporting system. And once again, it's not a novel approach. There are many community corrections agencies throughout the country that have a program like this. We started our telephone reporting system back in 2012 as well, and it really lends to what evidence-based research says, and that is over-supervising your low-risk individuals is counterproductive. And the people that we have participating in the telephone reporting system are just that, low-risk individuals. We started the program, as I said, in 2012. And then in 2019, we kind of modified the way we do our telephone reporting system. We entered into a no-cost contract with our current vendor where we magnified or kind of intensified our telephone reporting system. Now it's done through voice biometrics. It's through an automated system. And we learned during COVID just how impactful or how effective this program is. At the onset of COVID, we had about 6,000 people participating in the program. We looked at some of our strategies through this program and said, you know what, we want to go ahead and loosen up the reins on this and allow more of these low-risk individuals to participate. And from that, we were able to increase the number of people that participate in this program. As we talk today, Joe, I'm happy to say that we've got approximately 13,000 individuals that are low-risk individuals that participate in this program. And we've got some really good data that supports just how good this program is. Our success rate of the people that have participated in this program is right about 82%. That's 4 out of every 5 people that participate in the telephone reporting are successful completers of probation. Also, the people that participate in this program, their compliance rate with the program is right about 97%. It doesn't mean that 97% of them are complying with all their terms of supervision. It means that 97% of them are complying with the terms of this incentive program. They're calling in when they're supposed to. They're paying their money when they're supposed to. They're doing the things that are outlined in the telephone reporting system. A really good program for us. We've also got another good incentive program that we call the Merit-Based Activity Program. And this program is for our community control individuals, or the ones that you may know as house arrest. If you know a little bit about Florida's house arrest program, which I know you do, it requires that individual to give an hourly accounting of their weekly schedule. It requires them to report to the probation office every week, and we see those individuals in the field every week. As you can imagine, a very intensive program. Our success rate with these individuals is about 30%, which is very low. But we had an officer one time that used to work in our Mariana probation office up in the Panhandle named Darrell Williams, and he was a long-time community control officer. And he made a suggestion, and you know that suggestions from the field are oftentimes the best suggestions we can get because they are the people with the boots on the ground. He made a suggestion that with these community control individuals, there are a lot of them that are complying with the terms of supervision. However, there are some of them that are not complying because they're breaking their schedule to go spend time with their family. And as you know, evidence-based research suggests that family time increases somebody's chances of success and being more productive in the communities. So he made a recommendation to implement a merit-based activity program that allows compliant individuals to spend up to 4 hours a month with their family members as long as it's approved by the probation officer. This program has been a game changer. I'm happy to say, Joe, that I mentioned earlier that our success rate's about 30% with this program. However, we've had about 5,000 people since the inception participate in this merit-based activity program, and their success rate is over 80%, almost 2.5 times higher with this incentive program from the people who do and don't participate. So incentive programs are one more way that we protect the public. And as you said earlier, it takes those incentive programs to really help individuals out because everybody wants positive reinforcement.
Well said, Joe. Well said. I was a former community control officer for the Florida Department of Corrections. You're bringing back all sorts of memories for me now, Joe. Yeah, that would have been, like I said, late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, Florida's house arrest program, for lack of a better word. And so glad to hear that you're taking the input of those line officers. That's how implementation science really works and flourishes. One of the goals of this podcast, Joe, is to do better public relations, I guess, for the field of probation and parole. There's a lot of people that don't understand what we do. Sometimes even the folks we supervise don't understand what our true role is. They think it's just to catch them and lock them up. Maybe highlight some tools and resources used to assist individuals under supervision, to highlight that it's not all just about control and surveillance and containment.
Yeah, Joe, once again, I really appreciate you asking this because a lot of times, as you said, people think of probation, they think of the first layer, monitor and enforcement. But in reality is we want our people to be more productive in the community, and providing essential tools to them are very, very important. I've talked about some of those important tools and resources we give them earlier with the mobile probation unit. Really excited about that. Our reentry simulations are excellent. Our Face It program, our Thinking for a Change program is really good. It really helps individuals out in their cognitive ability to think, and I know that Mr. Lovins talked a little bit about that as well. But one area that we really, really like is our employment specialists. In Florida, we're broken up into judicial circuits. We have 20 of them. In each judicial circuit, we have an employment specialist that specializes on providing employment opportunities and teaching employability skills to people that are unemployed. If somebody comes in the probation office and they are unemployed, then at that point, our probation officers refer them to this employment specialist position. When they go to the employment specialist position and they talk through things, then at that point, they help them find jobs in those areas that they know those companies that hire people that are convicted of felony offenses that don't know that there's a stigma associated with it. But there's also an advantage of employing these people because they want to be successful just like us. They also teach resume writing skills and other employability skills classes that help make somebody more attractive when it comes to finding employment. And I've talked a lot about evidence-based research, or at least mentioned a couple times earlier. Evidence-based research also suggests if somebody's employed, their chances for success go up greatly. And this is something that I look at quite a bit when it comes to our successful terminations. And when we have people that successfully terminate supervision, the people that successfully terminate, approximately 78% of them are gainfully employed at the time that they terminate supervision. So this employment specialist position, and once again, has been a game changer for us. And oftentimes people don't understand that providing those tools and resources to these people protect the public more so than some of the other areas that I talked about earlier.
Joe, earlier in the interview, you told the story of when, as a probation officer, you went to a revocation hearing in court and the individual was sent off to prison for a term of 27 years and how that really impacted you. That reminded me of a story that I was told as a graduate student. I was taking a criminology course, and our professor, Dr. Robert Prout, told us aspiring criminal justice practitioners that throughout your careers, you're going to have these moments that sort of impact you and change your career trajectory. And he said, it's nothing I can teach you in this class. It's nothing I can teach you in a textbook, but you'll know it when you experience it. Again, something like you went through with that young man being sent off to prison for 27 years. As the assistant secretary, you have a lot of opportunities to impact people. Are there other things that have impacted you on your journey, Joe?
Well, that's a great question again, Joe, and I can probably talk for 30, 40, 50 minutes on things that impact me. I guess I'll say from the personal aspect, I know we're not talking personal about stuff anyway, that what's really impacted me is my wife and my grandchildren. As I talk to you on this podcast, you may not know this, but I'm a grandfather to 8 beautiful grandchildren, and the impact them and my wife have had on me has been priceless. I know there was a time in my career, especially being a young leader, I looked at operations through a really a magnified lens. but having my wife and the grandchildren really teach me some valuable life lessons has helped me become a better leader. So from a personal perspective, my wife and grandchildren, but it's also helped me out in my professional career. Something else that's impacted me, and as I was talking to you during this last 45, 50 minutes and talking about some of the great initiatives that we've done in Florida, I'm very fortunate because I'm the voice. I'm the one that gets to talk about them. But in reality, these events wouldn't have taken place if it wasn't for the excellent staff that we have in the Florida Department of Corrections. Because of them, we are able to do these things, and they impact me so much. I burned these roads up in the state of Florida. I went from one end to the other. I've been very fortunate to visit every probation office in the state and talk to almost every one of our staff members. And it's the highlight of what I get to do. You know, we think that making money is done in the office. Really, making the money is going out in the field and talking to the most important members of our agency, and that is the people with the boots on the ground. And they have no idea how much they impact me, but they impact me gratefully. And that's probably one of the biggest things that impacted me in my career, but also impactful. I guess the opportunities to participate in all the great things I'm able to participate in. I'm part of many boards. I'm the Interstate Compact Commissioner. I participated in a lot of work groups and a lot of committees. And as you know, Joe, we have one thing in common, or one of many things in common, and that is that we are both members of the International Relations Committee with the American Probation and Parole Association. And this committee is a great committee. And several years ago, I really wanted to see how I can be more involved in the American Probation and Parole Association. So I looked at the number of committees that were available, and I called up a friend that we have in common. And ironically enough, his name is Joe as well, Joe Russo. And I went through some of the committees that I was interested in, and I went through them and I asked them, what are these committees like and what are the committee chairs like? And I got to the committee that was the International Relations Committee. And he said, Joe, you're not going to believe this. The committee chair, Julie Truchell, is one of the best committee chairs you'll ever experience. And the committee itself is very impactful. So I went ahead and signed up for the committee. A few days later, I got an email from Julie saying that I was part of this committee, and I've been part of it for about 3 years now. And I can't tell you, Joe, that the things that Joe Russo said to me are so true. Julie is the best committee chair that I've ever seen. She moves the committee forward, and not to mention the number of relationships that have been established. You know, on this committee, we have community corrections leaders, professionals from all over the world, not just the country, but from all over the world. And you know this, and just how valuable that is and how much of an impact it's had on me. I was able to attend the Fifth World Congress in Ottawa, Canada. As I was sitting there, a gentleman named Steve Pitts, that's part of our International Relations Committee, came up to me and he said, you know what? There's somebody I want you to meet. And her name was Jana Sparrow. And I mentioned her earlier. She's the head of the Confederation of European Probation. I was able to talk to her, and the number of conversations we've had since that time have been great. The conversations have been very impactful, and it's just one more way that it's impacted me. And I can tell you on the call or on this podcast that if anybody's listening and they want to be part of the American Probation and Parole Association, and they're thinking about a committee to join, the best committee that you can join is the International Relations Committee, because the people that are on the committee, but most importantly, because that committee chair, Julie Truchell, she is that awesome.
Julie is amazing. I'm trying to remember my own backstory here, Joe. Julie was on the program, and I'm trying to remember. It's kind of a chicken egg thing. I think after she was on the program is when she invited me to join the IRC, the International Relations Committee. And as you said, it's just been such a great experience for me. I found a way to leverage all of my passion for exploring comparative systems of probation around the world, internationally. And yeah, like you said, just a great committee to be on if you're looking to do a deeper dive with some of your APPA activities. You mentioned the World Congress. I didn't get a chance to go when it was in Canada. I believe in April of 2024, it's going to be in the Netherlands. So let's put that on our bucket list, Joe. Maybe we can connect then. But we'll also be connecting in New York City. So yes, I will leave links in the episode description of this podcast to registration information for the upcoming Training Institute in New York. August of 2023. Joe, anything else you can think of to mention or promote in the limited time we have remaining here?
Well, I'll finish the same way I started, Joe, by saying once again, thank you for having me be on this Criminologist podcast. What an honor. Speaking with you, we've got a lot of things in common. We both know the 1903 Okeechobee Probation Office. I didn't mention it earlier, but I lived in Okeechobee for 4 years. And every time I go to the Okeechobee Probation Office, I share stories with some of the people who work there. They've got a lot of longtime staff that grew up in that area as well. So we have that in common, along with the International Relations Committee and the American Probation and Parole Association. So thank you again. What an honor. Thank you.
Joe, I'll see you in New York, if not sooner. Joe Winkler, Assistant Secretary for the Florida Department of Corrections. Thanks for coming on to the Criminologist podcast, Joe.
Thank you.
A major Criminologist podcast thank you to Joe Winkler, Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections at the Florida Department of Corrections. Thanks, Joe, for that trip down memory lane. This was a really fun interview for me, bringing me back all those years to 1988, 35 years ago. I could have never imagined sitting in the academy at Vero Beach, Florida, as a young, newly hired probation officer, that my career would have taken the amazing twists and turns that it has, allowing me to travel to so many different places and meet so many other probation and corrections professionals around the world, and of course, interviewing individuals such as Joe Winkler. Thanks again, Joe, for an amazing interview. As promised, I have left relevant links in the episode description of this program. Go ahead and check those out. I've left a link for how you may register for the upcoming American Probation and Parole Association's annual training institute in New York City. I've also left a link for the aforementioned free giveaway. One lucky winner is going to win a free trip to the 48th Annual Training Institute in New York City. This includes round-trip coach airline ticket, 3 nights hotel accommodation, and of course the full Institute registration, all covered with this giveaway. So check out that link as well. I've also left a link for the Florida Department of Corrections homepage. Within that homepage, you'll find all sorts of cool resources related to employment opportunities, volunteer opportunities, and a lot of the cool, innovative programs that Joe's referenced in today's interview. So please check that out as well. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, program development, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact us via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
When I was in elementary school and middle school, I can assure you when the teacher went around the room and asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, I never said I wanted to be a probation officer.
This has been a special APPA edition of the Criminologist Podcast. Their international relations team looks forward to sharing the insights of other subject matter experts from around the world in future episodes. The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.